Hey y'all, it's Brenda at Slapout Homestead, and today I'm going to show you how I make my favorite bread. It's sourdough, it's quinoa, it's whole wheat, and it's honey. And you're going to love it. It's beautiful, it's delicious, and it's nutritious. So hang around and I'll be right back and I'll show you how we make our bread. So for my all-time favorite bread, which is the sourdough honey quinoa bread. Now this recipe came from the King Arthur Flour website. So we start out, earlier I did the quinoa, and you put a half a cup of quinoa. I use the red because it shows up in the bread really cool, you'll see. You put a half a cup of quinoa in a strainer and you rinse it really well for about a minute, and then you put it in a saucepan with a cup of water and you simmer it for 15 minutes until it's been absorbed, until the water's been absorbed, and then you let it cool. So I spread it out on this platter here and let it cool. So that goes into our bowl. So we get all that in there. And actually I misspoke. The first thing you do is not to cook the quinoa and let it cool. The first thing you do is you wake up your sourdough starter. So a few days ago I took my sourdough starter out of the refrigerator and I've been feeding it twice a day. And it is now ready to make bread. And the way that you can tell if your sourdough is ready to make bread is if you take a little dollop of it and then put it in some water, just room temperature water. If it floats, it's ready to make bread. If it doesn't float, then you need to keep feeding it and check it the next day. And by feeding it, I put 100 grams of the starter in a bowl. I add 100 grams of water and 100 grams of flour. It's just regular all-purpose flour. And stir that up. Cover it with a shower cap. You don't want to put plastic on there too tight. You want to let it breathe a little bit. So now we've got our quinoa in the bowl. I'm going to go ahead and clean it all off of here. So we'll turn on our scale. And that way we can tare it to 0. And we need 4 ounces of ripe starter. Now this is what my starter looks like when it's ripe. See all the bubbles in there? Yeah, and it has a really yummy, tangy smell. So we're going to add in 4 ounces. Let me bring this over here a little bit. There we go. 4 ounces of the ripe starter. And do this by weight. If you do it by measurements, it's hard to tell how much you have because of all those bubbles. But if you do it by weight, you'll be consistent. Okay, we're at 3.9. There's 4. Good. Even. Exactly 4. Okay, we'll tear this out again so that it reads 0. Add in 4 ounces of room temperature water. Okay, there's our 4 ounces of room temperature water. We add in a 1/4 cup of rolled oats. 2 tablespoons of honey. We're going to add in 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil, so I'm just going to measure it in here. Okay, there's our 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil. Two teaspoons of active yeast. I'm going to put in, this is my addition to the recipe, but I'm going to put in some gluten. And it's just vital wheat gluten. I'll turn my scale back on. I usually put in 0.3 ounces. And just sprinkle it in there. It just helps with the, it helps it rise, because we're using, at this point we're adding whole wheat flour. And you'll find that when you make recipes that call for whole wheat flour, you might need a little bit of extra gluten just to help the bread rise, because the wheat flour is a little bit heavier. So we want 4 ounces of wheat flour. And my battery just went out on my scale. So I'm just going to guess. I have to guess on my flour because my battery just died on my scale. That was bad timing. I use this every day when I weigh out my eggs. It helps know what size they are. Alright, I'm going to bring my mixer over. Bring over the KitchenAid and plug it in. Use the paddle at this point. Alright, then we're just going to mix this a bit. That looks about the right consistency. I think I guessed well with my whole wheat flour. Yeah, that looks right. Good. Alright, now at this point I'm just going to set that down in there. I'm going to cover this bowl with my towel. Which recently was wrapped up around an apple pie, so forgive the little bits of apple pie stuck to it. Now this stands for 10 minutes and then we come back and do what's next. So I will bring you back in 10 minutes. Let's set our timer. Alright, I will see you in 10 minutes. Alright, our 10 minutes is up. We'll get this back on here. And we're going to add in 5.2 ounces of bread flour that I mixed with 2 tablespoons of dry milk and a teaspoon of salt. And then it could take more bread flour. The recipe says 5.2 to 6.2 ounces, so I always start with the lowest number because I can always add more. Let's stir this until it forms a dough. And once it comes together, we'll switch over to our dough hook. Yeah, I think that's good right there. See, you can see how you can really see that red quinoa in there. It's very pronounced. Alright. Let's clean this dough off of here. This is probably the healthiest bread I've ever made. It is so good, and everybody loves it. I made us a mini Thanksgiving dinner this weekend. So I wanted to have some bread to make turkey sandwiches with. It's always too hot to cook Thanksgiving dinner in November. I mean, we do it anyway, but it's really kind of miserable. And I thought I was going to get a break in the weather. It was predicted to be chilly this weekend, and it really wasn't. So it ended up being pretty warm to be in here with the oven on all day. Alright, now we'll get our dough hook in there. And let that go for a little bit. You can knead this by hand if you like. So I'm going to let this knead for about 4 minutes up on number 2. And then I'll stop, scrape down the bowl, and let it knead another 4 minutes at number 2. And once that's finished kneading, we'll put it in our greased container and let it rise for a little bit. So I will bring you back when it's time to do that. Work it, machine, work it. Alright, see you in a little bit. Alright, we've been kneading for 8 minutes. And it's still really sticky, but we're going to leave it sticky. That's why we kneaded it in the machine instead of by hand. Because we don't want our dough to be dry. We want it to rise really nicely. And a sticky dough rises better. So we're just going to scrape this one last time. Get it into our greased container. And then it's going to rise until it doubles, which will be about an hour. Alright, plop plop. There. worked out. So there we are. We're in our grease container, and I'll set this lid on top and just leave it like that for about an hour. Then we'll come back and show you what it looks like. I'm sure it'll be a lot bigger. But if that were to flatten down, it's probably at about 3 cups. About 3 cups of our dough. So I'll come back and show you. Hopefully it'll be right at 6 cups. See you in a little bit. While our dough is rising, I wanted to show you how I prepare the sourdough to go back in the refrigerator. So here's our sourdough, water, all-purpose flour, and a spatula. Oh, and a bowl, another bowl. Here we go. Alright, now we'll get our scale on, which I put new batteries in, so we're good to go now. Change it over to grams. I'm going to put in 100 grams. Go. Zero out our scale and add in 100 grams of water. Just room temperature water. Zero out our scale and add in 100 grams of all-purpose flour. Okay, so at this point we just mix. It's a lot thicker than pancake batter, but it's a lot wetter than biscuit dough. And then we put it in our container. This was a candle, and it had one of those plastic gaskets right there to make the lid fit on tightly, but you don't want that with a sourdough. So I took the plastic off so that this can just sit on top and move around and allow air to escape. And I named my sourdough Kevin because I want everything that I make with this to taste like Kevin. Ba-dum-bum. Okay. Now we just get our sourdough into the jar. And a wet finger gets the rest off of there. There we go. Now the lid goes on top. And this, I'm going to let this sit out for about an hour while our dough is rising, and then pop it in the fridge, and then it can live in the fridge until I'm ready to use it again. Bye, Kevin. Well, we are at 6 cups volume, and that did not take an hour. It only took about a half hour. That's how warm it is in my kitchen right now. So now it's on to the shaping. So the first thing I'm going to do is cover my surface with flour. And then we're going to deflate. And usually deflating happens just by pouring it out. We don't want huge bubbles in this bread. And we really don't want it to stick to our surface. So at this point we want to flatten it into about a 6-inch wide log. And we can pick it up and let it stretch. The weight of it will help. And we're using a 9x5 loaf pan that I've already greased. It's right here. So now that we've got our approximately 6-inch strip, I'm just making a little divot in the middle so it doesn't get really super thick in the middle, because it will. Now we're just going to start at one end and roll. Rolling fairly tightly. Okay, we're almost done. Now tuck these ends so I can use my thumb to push them in. And go back to where the where they meet, give it a little pinch, and then put that part on the bottom. So right now we're just making it a little more even. Basically enclosing it. Kinda, sorta. It's not going to be perfect. Now it does get to rise again, so any of those little imperfections in the shaping will work themselves out. So we're going in the pan. Just going to press it so it goes into the corners. Okay, that's it. Now we'll cover it with some greased plastic wrap. And let it rise until it's ready to bake. And get everything put away. Get all this flour cleaned up. And I will be back when it's ready to put it in the oven to show you what we do before we put it in the oven. Alright, we have finished rising. I'll show you what it looks like. You want it to be about 1 inch above. That's how much it's risen. And the way you can tell it's ready is when you poke your finger into it, it leaves an indent. So the next thing we're going to do before we put it in the oven is we're going to slash it. And I have this here handy dandy slasher. So we're just going to make some diagonal slashes. This is about 1/4 inch deep, but I'll go back and hit them again. I'll turn it the other way and go in the same slashes to make it about 1/2 inch. Turn it around. And re-slash. So this goes in the oven for 40 to 45 minutes or until it's deep golden brown, and we want the interior to be at 190 degrees. And I will bring you back when it's time to get it out of the oven. Alright, we have our beautiful bread out of the oven. I'll show it to you. And I let it stand here in the pan for 5 minutes, and now we're going to tip it out. And I put the plastic wrap that I had over the top of it while it was rising. I put it underneath this cooling rack right here, so that just in case I drip butter, it doesn't go all over my counter. So now we're gonna brush some butter all over the outside. So five minutes on the cooling rack in the pan. And now we're going to brush it with butter and let it cool completely before we cut into it. Wait till you see how pretty this is with the butter on it. Very hot. It ended up only taking 35 minutes in the oven as opposed to the 40 to 45 minutes that the recipe calls for. Just at about the half hour mark, I was looking at it and I was noticing that it was getting really brown. So I put my thermometer in there, my temperature probe, and it wasn't a minute and a half later that it let me know it was at 190 degrees on the inside. So there you are. Next time you see this bread, it'll be completely cooled and we will be cutting into it. Can't wait. Yum, yum. See y'all later. Well, our bread is cooled and I can't wait to show you what it looks like on the inside. So let's get to cutting. I know it sounds like a chainsaw, but alright, ready? That one has a little hole right in the middle. Another reason why I use the red quinoa, you can see it in there. Isn't that pretty? It's perfect. It's just when I was rolling it up, it was a little loose right in the beginning and it made a little hole. You'll see it on the other piece. I'll show it to you. See a little hole right in the middle, right there. But it's still going to be delicious. It's going to make a really yummy turkey sandwich, and that's what's for dinner. So you can see the rest of the hole right there. So yes, be mindful when you're rolling it up so you can see the swirls in it too. Isn't that cool? That's why I shape my loaves that way, because I like that swirl. So be mindful when you're rolling it up to keep it tight right at the very beginning so you don't end up with a hole right in the middle. Now for storing, I'm going to actually go ahead and cut the whole thing into slices. And then I normally just store it in an old bread bag. I'll check it and make sure it doesn't have any holes in it. And it can stay out on the counter for a couple days, but after that I'll stick it in the fridge. And we will end up eating every bit of this. Makes good toast. Makes good sandwiches. And there's our beautiful loaf of bread. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I had a good time making this bread. I love this. It's my favorite. Probably the healthiest bread I've ever made. I will put the link to the recipe down below, along with all the equipment that I used. And I will see you on the next video. God bless you. Love y'all. Bye.